So today I am joined by the incredible leader in the private rented sector, Allison Thompson from LRG. So Allison has played a pivotal role in shaping professional standards in lettings and property management across the UK. She's someone who leads with growth, strength, clarity and integrity, and has quietly influenced the direction of the industry for years. We're talking about leadership, resilience, breaking barriers, and what truly takes to thrive as a woman in property. So Allison, thank you so much for joining me.
Very lovely welcome. Thank you so much.
It's very well deserved.
Goodness me.
No, I'm absolutely delighted that you're part of our Women in Property series, because you and I have got a lovely history together, and I think actually our journey started before our show started, and actually when it was Leaders Roman Group, that the first event we ever did, which was back in 2012, we approached leaders at the time and approached you and said, would you be interested? And you were, and you actually, what I've got to thank you for today is that you put that trust into me and Steve when we had this idea. And without somebody like you giving us that opportunity and going, go for it and we'll support it, we wouldn't be here nearly 13 years down the line. So that's a massive thank you from me for a start for this.
Oh my gosh. You're welcome. I don't know what you're thanking me for, but it's been a pleasure all the way.
Oh, thank you, Alison. So let's start with right back to the beginning of this for you. How did your journey, begin with LRG?
So my journey began in 1992 when I was at a bit of a crossroads where I'd left university a bit early due to a personal bereavement in my family, and I wasn't really sure of my direction. And a friend of mine worked at the local letting agency Leaders in Brighton, and there was an administrator role going, and I just thought, do you know what, that sounds interesting. And so I went for the interview and I got the job, and I thought, I'm just going to see how this goes. Not my intention at all. I studied to be a journalist.
Oh wow.
So it was just a complete change, and I just went for the role, and I started as an administrator in it was the first branch of Leaders on the South Coast. I was tucked in a back office on a typewriter. That's how old I am. On a typewriter. Nobody will know what they are anymore. Typing up tenancy agreements, and I loved it. I just fell in love with the buzz of it all, and the busyness, and helping people, move home. And it was just addictive right from the start.
That's amazing.
Right from the start.
That's incredible, isn't it? So it's like, often we end up by accident getting into this, don't we?
Completely by accident. Yeah. This was never an intentional move, and I just got hooked. I got sucked in, and my journey really. I suppose I've grown up now with the business, because I joined relatively young and then progressed through
on the job.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that you wanted to be a journalist all these years I've known you, because that's what I actually wanted to be.
Really?
Yeah. And I was meant to go to Brighton to do exactly that, and then I fell into the world of advertising and marketing.
See, you're sort of similar, but yeah, I had this vision that I was going to be like, I don't know, reading the news or something.
So did I.
And
we're here today.
But now I find, I do it a lot now with the nature of my job, but I find being in front of the camera actually a little bit daunting.
Yeah.
But I don't know why I thought I could read the news. But.
Yeah, I thought it'd be the lowest lane of I don't know what, but it's funny, isn't it? But in our jobs actually comes full circle.
Yeah.
And I know for me it takes taken me a while to get used to being in front of the camera. So for somebody that wanted to set out and do that, we've kind of come full circle.
Yeah, we have.
Here today.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Go us.
Absolutely.
Go us.
A next sort of question is, how has LRG evolved during your time there, and how have you evolved alongside it? Many changes.
Wowzers. So yes, so like I said, I joined Leaders, which was the sort of original one of the original founding brands of LRG. Joined in 1992. back then a letting only agent, letting and property management, and there was, I think, about 10 branches on the south coast at the time. Fast forward, we ended up with private equity backing, which helped really sort of fast forward our growth, which enabled us to buy more businesses. Fast forward further still, and then we ended up, through the private equity world, ended up merging with Romans, hence the Leaders Romans Group, and now LRG. And today we are, from those 10 branches on the south coast, we're now, I think, just short of 350 branches nationally. Some of those have been organic growth in the early days. But obviously now we've been able to sort of buy good quality lettings businesses as we've grown. But equally, the business is like diversified massively. So we started off as a lettings and property management business, but now we have a big sales division. You know, we have surveying, we have block management, we have lots of other disciplines in property. And obviously, as we buy businesses, we gain the expertise potentially that we didn't have previously. So the business has grown massively. My sort of growth with it, I suppose, some of it I've maybe sort of run ahead a little bit, but some of it I've been sort of dragged along with it. Very early on, in the sort of first early stages of acquiring a lettings business. I remember it was one of the first ones, and it was in Bromley, and I remember my boss at the time said, you've done a brilliant job with, you know, running some of the branches down in Brighton. How do you fancy going and having a look at a business that we've just bought and helping implement the procedures and the standards, etc., etc. And that was my first sort of dalliance into something that was outside my comfort zone, and then that sort of piqued my interest a little bit more, and then I became a lot more involved in the sort of operations of the business as well as driving the sales, and then my role just went further and further, and as the business grew, obviously you then have to create an infrastructure and a leadership structure, and you know, I went from managing, you know, 1 to 2 branches to then managing 10 to then managing 60 to then, you know, and I've had to obviously, you know, educate myself, but I think the experience of being with a business that's continually growing also gives you that sort of on-the-job experience that I think you can't really replicate. You know, I've seen the success and failures of acquisitions, but I've also seen the property market, it's very cyclical, and I've seen, you know, a lot of changes in that, and now obviously, you know, one of the biggest legislative changes with renters' rights. So, you know,
you've seen a lot, and I mean, what an experience to be part of that, you know, that growth, you know, from the early stages, and what a way to learn on the job. You know, that's incredible. You know, because it really has evolved hugely. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've made tons of mistakes along the way, but you know, I suppose it's growth.
It's part of it. You have to, you know, that's the thing. You learn on as you're going, and then you learn how to just do things better again, don't you? So Alison, like, how would you say the industry's changed since you sort of started your role with LRG?
So thinking back to when I first started out, and I was, you know, an administrator and then a negotiator in a very busy, buzzy environment, I think that definitely with the likes of, you know, professional qualifications, ALA, the industry's moved from being still very transactional, but I think it's now more about professional credibility, qualifications and standards. And I think what's happened and what will happen with renters' rights even more is that the sector will become a lot more professionalised, because let's face it, there is, you know, still a lot of rogue agents out there, and it is still a shame that, you know, people, because it's not regulated, people can be a letting agent fairly easily, and it's there are some shocking horror stories out there. And I think what has happened over time is people aspire to be professionally qualified, and that's amazing. And over time, we've seen that improve, and also the compliance element. So, a tenant has every right to be safe in a property. So just as you would want to be safe in a home that you owned, now the sector safeguards tenants being in properties that are not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And that will improve even further with renters' rights. So I think how it's changed, it's become much more of an acceptable place to be. A landlord investing in property and a tenant wanting to be a tenant rather than a homeowner. That's okay.
Yeah.
Because the same standards should apply. And I think the professionalism of the sector has just become more and more and more. And I think both agents and landlords, the standards are just raising year on year, and obviously with renters' rights we'll do even more so.
Yeah, which is all a good thing.
It's all a good thing.
It's all a good thing. It's painful to get through that, but I think with practical steps, and I know LRG are all about that as well, and you've put so much in place to help people, tenants and landlords, to keep them up to speed. And there's I think you did them at the show, actually, was the health checks, and they're fantastic. It just breaks it down, and it just makes sure that everyone knows what they need to do, what systems they need to put in place, and actually take a practical step towards that. So
it's so complex now. I think that's the main thing. It's when I first started, as long as you had a set of keys and there was light and heat, that was enough, but
Absolutely.
Now it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, 100%. So sort of going back onto a little bit now in terms of, our sort of working together in partnership with National Landlord Investment Show, industry impact. I mean, as we said earlier, you've supported the show since the very first show back in 2013, and I still remember that day like it was yesterday. And now, we've worked together, and we've grown. I mean, you guys have grown, phenomenally.
As have you.
Oh, thank you. And now it's so lovely because, from having that stand, LRG are actually headline sponsor now of all of the shows throughout this year. So, what's that journey meant to you, and how do you feel about that journey?
It's meant a lot, because I think that having had built that relationship with you and Steve in the early days, I think you understood what we were trying to achieve as a business, sort of culturally and ethically. And I think, National Landlord Investment Show mirrors that massively in terms of, the aspiration to want to have a platform to educate landlords, I think is so important. And it makes our life as letting agents easier as well, because it's giving us the ability to speak to landlords that want to do the right thing, and it makes our sort of relationship with the landlords much easier, and it breaks down those barriers of expectation. So if, platforms like yours, give a lot of great information and make sure that landlords understand it's important, the transparency of everything, it's important to, have the knowledge to be the best landlord you could possibly be. And then if they do want to use an agent, then we're not having to sort of go through that whole education piece again. And it just means that the partnership means that we've got, we're like-minded in our approach, and it just means that we can then provide the best possible service and carry on that sort of advice-led approach. So it's really important for me to have this partnership, because we're both aspiring for the same things, which is raising the standards and just providing the best possible service.
Yeah, no, and the exact, in that reverse for us, because as the big part of this was to try and create that, and it's lovely when we see so many people coming out to the shows, and it just strengthens everything, that there are so many good landlords out there that do the right thing day in, day out. They don't come out for the day just for a day out. They're busy people, aren't they?
It's a commitment. And what's great, and the landlords that I talk to at the shows, they want to do the right thing, and they want to get the best advice, and potentially build their portfolios, but with a infrastructure and a network of great people around them that they can pull on.
Yeah.
So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant, and we're delighted, obviously. And I think it'd be quite funny. I think you and I said before, there will definitely be landlords that from the very first show that are probably still in LRG and using
totally.
you guys, that is just testament as well, which I think is wonderful. So in terms of sort of events like ours, I mean, how do you think we play in sort of raising the standards across the private rented sector? And anything that you would say to a landlord that's wanting to come out to an event, what difference would that make to them?
So I think that the shows provide such an amazing platform for landlords to really not only gain a lot of really valuable advice from some industry experts, but also to network with like-minded individuals as well. And I think what you've always done really, really well is maybe listen to the needs of those landlords rather than second guess what it is that they're going to want to hear about. And I think you've always got that mixture right of having sort of legal advice, tax advice, legislative changes that are on the horizon, sort of any tools or techniques or pieces of software, lots and lots of good sort of breakout sessions that are unique to maybe one aspect of letting or property management, and obviously some diversification off that. So there's the sort of big panel debates, which are great because you're then able to sort of get the most up-to-date information, but also some really good specialist subject matter experts that then people can then choose which areas they want to go in, and there's enough variety that you definitely, I think, as a landlord would be able to come to that event and at least come away with a piece of information that perhaps you didn't have before, or a connection that will help you to maximise your return on your investment.
Yeah, and that summarises it beautifully. So thank you.
Oh,
and I think as well, like in terms of panels, we'll talk about panels a little bit because we've obviously got imminent show coming up very, very soon, 24th of March. And actually that big morning panel debate that you've taken part in many times, that is all females. I mean, we have a lot of amazing females, and I'm very privileged day in, day out that I get to work with so many amazing women. But I think that morning we've got yourself, we've got Kate Faulkner, we've got Susie Corolla. I'm trying to think if we've got one more amazing female. We've got Carly German from Woodstock. So we've got a real powerhouse there in the morning.
And I think as well, every day's a school day for me. I learn so much as well from these events. I know I've been in the industry a long time, but I see it through a lens of being, an agent, whereas I find it really helpful for me because then I hear perspectives through different different lens, and I learn something every time I go.
Yeah, and it's sometimes sometimes people can be guarded, but I find in our community that we work in, it's about collaborating or actually trying to help each other as well. Like what I might not know, that I will come to you on a personal level and go, Alison, what do you think I should do about this? Or you'll go, well, actually, why don't you speak to that person? And and I think that's what we're really good at, women as well, is kind of just that clear communication. It's a really amazing network, and that's not to say it's an all-female girls group because we work with so many amazing men. But I think it's quite nice when I see, sometimes there's no issue with you on a panel with another agency, and often you're actually working together, or there's no bad blood there, which is great.
And I think that's why I enjoy some of those panel debates, because actually there's no ego and it's all about being real. And I think sometimes, and Kate's brilliant at this, she sort of cuts straight through it. She's like, right, come on then, what do we need to be really honest about today? And that's what I like about it, because everybody's there. They don't really want a show, they just want to be helped and informed, you know, and so it's got to be honest and real, isn't it?
Absolutely, and women are good at that, so
Yeah.
that's good. So Alison, what has been your proudest professional moment? What a question, but your proudest professional moment?
Goodness, yeah, what is it? What a question that is. I would say going back to when I worked just in the Leaders brand, and then we knew that we were going to merge with Romans. There was a senior team that ran Leaders and there was a senior team that ran Romans, and we were going to merge. And obviously anybody that's potentially been through a merger will know that that can be brilliant, but also can be challenging. And I remember being taken to one side by my boss and saying, look, we want you to lead this senior team through the merger.
Okay.
I was like, I was, you know, there was people in that senior team that I looked up to, respected, you know, they were sort of mentors of mine over the years. And I was like, you want me to lead the team? And that, I think, was my first sort of real step up, where I was like, right, okay, so this is not just about leading this team that I know really well and I'm comfortable, but now there's going to be a bunch of people over here that I don't know at all.
Yeah.
And I'm going to then sort of represent Leaders in collaboration, and then making an even bigger, better business through the merger. So I suppose I felt proud because it was a recognition that maybe I was capable, but also I think it was a reflection on maybe my collaboration skills, and maybe they were clever in to say, you know, how Alison might navigate that might be what we need to make it successful. And
well, that is something to be extremely proud of, because
yeah.
that's a big deal, isn't it? And huge responsibility. You know, you've got to bring two teams together, as you say, that don't know each other, make it all work and make it pain-free for everyone. And that definitely needs, you know, neutral in the middle, doesn't it? Because I can imagine that's not easy.
It wasn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't. And it had its ups and downs.
Yeah.
It had its ups and downs. But, you know, we've come through... and the sort of the team that we're left with today, that's the sort of LRG senior team, is I think the strongest it's ever been.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
That was no pressure then, was it?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I definitely came home every night thinking, what?
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was pretty stressful.
I can imagine. So is there a key decision or initiative that you introduced, you know, that changed your organised, you know, trajectory really?
Yeah, I think there was one. I mean, we're about to come into a big change with renters' rights, but going back a few years now, when there was the tenant fee ban. Yeah. So the tenant fee ban gave us a sort of another curveball that we had to sort of navigate in terms of change of legislation, you know. And as a letting agent, you know, the way in which you construct your charging system was that you charged landlords, but you also charged tenants, and then all of a sudden, all of that revenue stream disappeared. Yeah. So we had to think about how we might mitigate that revenue stream. But I think today we still have it, but I was instrumental in introducing a revenue stream to the business that not only closed that gap, but it's grown year on year to become something bigger than the gap we were closing initially. But also, you know, it was something that added value back to customers as well. So particularly in a heavily compliant world. So yeah, I think that changed the trajectory, because it was, you know, millions of pounds that we needed to find.
Problem and a solution.
And, you know, we came up with a solution that would give us, hopefully, bridge that gap, but also some value back to the customers. And so we still have it today.
And what was that?
I can't
say.
Can possibly say. Can possibly say trade secrets.
Fair enough. You've got to keep some of those. That's fair enough. No, that's amazing. I think like I can relate to that in a different way. I suppose for us as a business, obviously, when COVID, you know, hit, that was just like, oh my goodness me, like it was shocking all over the world, and it was just such a horrible time. But, you know, from our terms, it taught me a lot. And, you know, when you lose that sort of, that revenue, it's gone overnight, like you guys sort of had to challenge. It was like, okay, we've got no shows. What do we do?
Yeah,
what
I mean,
do
you know,
we do?
that was intense. Wasn't
it was
Because,
extremely
intense.
intense.
Your business model is reliant on people being able to be face to face.
It honestly was, and it was overnight, like quite literally. And that whole year's worth of revenue was gone. Forget it. And not only that, we were faced then with a problem because, you know, exhibitors had paid us to exhibit, and of course I paid out our fees for all of these huge venues. There was no insurance that covered us, so we had to really work very quickly, and that's actually, it taught me, you know, to not rely on one stream, you know. And, you know, Steve, God love him, you know, I am not a tech person. He was very quick and said, we've just got to go online and we've got to find a way and we'll make it work. And I remember that time thinking, how do we do that? But we did, and we learnt to diversify, and actually, you know, through that we've grown our brands and actually found a digital world. So there is always a solution, even in the midst of, like, you know, what on earth is going on. And actually you learn and you grow, and you look back and go, well, actually, in a strange kind of way, that was meant to happen.
It actually can sometimes be, you know, in the most challenging times come some of the best future outcomes. So,
Alison, you know, part of this sort of interview today is that you're going to be part of my sort of Women in Property series, which I really themed around, you know, Rise Women in Property. And it was just kind of finding out all of those moments that make women rise. You know, what do we, you know, what is that rise moment? So I have to ask you, looking back, you know, what do you think your true rise moment was or is?
Wow, that's a big question. So, like I've mentioned already, I've sort of grown up with LRG, and my own sort of career progression has sort of gone with a sort of growth trajectory that's been a bit like the business. And in a way, over the years, those sort of promotions into different roles haven't been that I've necessarily put my hand up for every one of them. They've sort of found me in a way. But I think that, you know, sitting in the sort of seat that I sit now, in an executive boardroom, I think the true rise moment was probably when I found myself in the early stages, after the merger, like one woman in a sea of men. That's very different now, by the way. It was that moment when I probably, you know, spoke up for the first time, and I found that maybe I made a decision that, you know, despite the outcome, I made a decision and we're going to stick with that decision. And, you know, just getting a bit more comfortable with the shift in my identity, because it was a bit more, a bit less around sort of managing and more about leading, and what that means. The difference between managing and leading became a big shift for me. And, you know, rather than, I'm always somebody that has really valued strong connections and strong collaboration, and I try and do that every day with integrity. But I think also I had to recognise that being sort of a strong leader and being able to rise is less about being liked and more about being the right sort of consistent leader. And, you know, sometimes in those environments I've had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I think that's maybe a bit more about my identity shift through leadership, rather than just that sort of, you know, a title or a promotion.
It makes total sense. And you know, as you say, get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, and you have to, and you do learn to be okay with that. It takes a while, but I think that's amazing. I really think that's great. Beyond titles or achievements, you know, what personal milestone means the most to you?
Things are very different nowadays, but I bought my first house when I was 21. So I think that set me off on the right path of home ownership. So I was very proud of being able to do that quite early on. I can't say I've run a marathon, I've run a half marathon. That nearly killed me. But yeah, I was proud of that because that was after a really difficult period in my life, and I just decided to put myself through something that, my body isn't designed to run. And I decided to do something that I knew would be hard. And yeah, I really put myself through that. So I was really proud to have actually completed it.
Yeah, no, and it's I think I did a Tough Mudder a few years back, and that wasn't easy, but you do get that sense of, do you know what, I can do this, and you're proving people wrong as well, which is great. Yeah. And yourself.
I just needed to finish before the man running backwards. I think that was my one goal.
That's brilliant. So Alison, this brings me nicely on to my next question. How have you intentionally created opportunities for women within LRG?
Yes, so LRG are just over 60% female workforce.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're very proud of that. But about 18 months ago, myself and a couple of other of my female colleagues created a programme called Empower Her. And that programme was designed to create stronger women leaders with, both in our own business, hopefully, but generally for them personally. This Empower Her programme has, we've always been a company that's been promoted from within and really encouraged strong training and development of all our people, no matter what the gender. But we specifically wanted to create this programme called Empower Her, which has been fantastic. And what it basically does is we've had lots of different topics, roundtable events, we've had guest speakers, and we've covered things like financial independence, managing all your priorities as a woman as well as a career, menopause, and all of the sort of interesting facts and figures around that, and general, fertility health. We've had roundtable events, we've had guest speakers, and then in parallel with that, we have had a mentor program where anyone can apply to have a mentor for 6 months, and then members of our exec team or senior management team then get paired up and then mentor these individuals for 6 months in order to help them, grow personally, but if they want to and choose to, advance their career. And it's been fantastic, and we've seen lots as hopefully maybe a part to play in some of the success and the promotions that we've had for some of these women in the business. So it's been fantastic.
Oh, that is amazing. And what a lovely thing to do, because obviously, there's so many elements that we deal with on a day-to-day, isn't there? But just knowing, obviously, you can go into it, but you've got that mentor as well, and that you've got your go-to person.
Yeah, and it was created to be a safe space, for women, obviously, but also, rather than there being another sort of training course or another event that you attend that's around, the business, this is about, diversification and just creating, strong women that hopefully can help can help our business thrive, but for them personally to thrive as well.
And then for them to become that for the next generations down. So that's wonderful. What would you say your top 3 tips for women wanting to thrive in property today? What are your top 3 tips that you would say?
Top 3 tips. Okay, I would say, depending on obviously where you are in your journey, but I would say, just looking back on my journey, I would say maybe have some commercial credibility. And what I mean by that is, if you're in an environment like I am, really know your numbers, because I think, if you're working in a sort of sales environment or a customer-facing environment, know your customer, know your numbers, and I think that gives you real commercial credibility. I think the other thing I would say would be build build your influence up with your network, build your influence up before you even need it. So I think sometimes I've ended up getting into an environment where I think, oh, I wish I could have influenced that better. So I think I would say, build your influence, before you find that you're in a situation where you wished you'd said something different or had the ability to influence your peers around you, particularly when there's a difficult decision to be made. And I think very, very simply, just step up before you feel ready, because don't wait.
Yeah.
Just step up before you feel ready, because there's a really interesting statistic that men will apply for a job if they've got probably about 60% of the qualifications. Women won't apply unless they feel 100% that they've got the qualifications. And I think that's a really interesting statistic. And so I would just say, just step up before you feel you're ready, because you're probably more ready than you think.
Comfort zone. Yeah, and we're sometimes over preparing and overthinking.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah,
amazing. This has been such a lovely interview, Allison, and I really want to thank you for your honesty, your leadership, and your continued support, of landlord education, and obviously how you are demonstrating all those massive leadership skills and progressing growth within LRG as well. I think it's just amazing. Women like you are just not succeeding in the sector. You're actually shaping the future. So, I think it's just lovely to have this conversation, and congratulations on all of your achievements. And I'm looking forward to see what the future brings. What else are we going to be doing, and what are you going to be doing in the future?
Yeah, and quite a few shows coming up, so I'll see you there.
There is loads. So Allison will be actually at the majority of the shows this year, and you can see those on the website as well, and part of a huge panel debates and providing that sort of education platform for landlords. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and again thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Tracey.
And we will see you all soon. Thank you.